At every crime scene, there is always some evidence left behind. Fingerprints, hair, synthetic fibers, blood. Evidence that when analyzed can usually link a criminal to the crime.
When we do forensics, particularly if the victim is deceased, that's one way that we can speak on behalf of a victim.
In this episode, a brutal rape and murder.
She was beaten very severely in the face and head.
The killer wore a condom, but would his attempt to hide evidence succeed?
It would be my job to determine if the two wrappers came from the same box of condoms.
And a senseless killing of an elderly lady.
There was blood spatter on the walls and the ceiling.
Catching the killer hung on a single shard of glass.
There were prints on both sides as if somebody was grasping that shard to try to remove it.
For these forensic experts, solving crimes is not only a science, it's an art they call dead reckoning. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. on a cold February 12, 1994. It snowed the night before. An officer from the Thornton, Colorado Police Department was on his way to work. As he approached the police barracks, he saw that a Cadillac, its engine still running, was stuck on the lawn. The driver's side door was half open, and as the officer ran to the scene, he heard a woman screaming for help. 31-year-old Jackie Criazzo was lying halfway on the ground, paralyzed by bullet wounds. She told the officer she had been shot just minutes before he arrived. As the paramedics raced to the scene, she told the officer something else. There had been another passenger in her car, a frightened young woman, but the gunman had dragged her away.
Even though that our patrol officers are in the area, that takes a lot of nerve to come up and point a gun in someone's face, kidnap the passenger, try and abduct someone from the front lawn of our police department.
Bob Lloyd is a veteran crime scene investigator for the Thornton PD. He moved to Colorado after 20 years of recovering evidence from more than 1,000 homicide scenes on the streets of Detroit. As investigator, Lloyd methodically photographed and gathered evidence at the scene. He couldn't help wondering how little time he had to find the missing woman.
It's a scary thought because our time is limited. Our first best shot is generally within 48 or 72 hours. We didn't have much to go on that first day, and we were hoping that she would turn up alive.
Part of that hope rested on Jackie's eyewitness testimony. She was severely wounded, but alert enough to give police an account of what happened, which they taped.
As I approached the vehicle, a long blonde-haired girl was standing in front of me, waving me down. She came around to the passenger side and jumped in the car and told me that he had been raping her and that she needed to get the heck out of there. She was hysterical.
Jackie and the blonde-haired woman began to make their way to the nearest police station, just down the road in Thornton. Jackie looked in her rearview mirror. The rapist had jumped into his car and started chasing them. He followed them for more than a mile, then swerved to the left of Jackie's Cadillac, lowered the passenger side window, and started shooting at them. The gunshots hit Jackie's car, but missed the two women. Instinctively, Jackie turned onto the eastbound Thornton Parkway, 1 block from the police station, but it was too late.
At that time, he cut over on her side of the car, passenger side, and it just started rapid fire.
2 of those shots hit Jackie, paralyzing her from the waist down. She lost control of the car, and it lurched over the median strip and onto the lawn of the Thornton Police Department. They were the only people on that quiet February day who saw what came next.
Then he came up to the car, passenger side, opened the door, and drug her back out of the car. I got the impression it was his intention that she was going to die.
The gunman reached back into the car and stole the woman's purse. He pointed his gun in Jackie's face and told her that he'd kill her if she talked. After that, Jackie lost sight of her passenger. But her description, which led to this police sketch, helped investigators piece together the events of that morning. Back at the crime scene, investigator Lloyd had to work quickly.
My main concern was as the sun comes up in Colorado, it has a tendency to melt things quite rapidly. So the overall photographs that I took had to be taken immediately so that I could determine what type of sequence, if I could, that had taken place around the car. There was a slight trail of blood that led along the parallel drag marks when he drug her. I believe this slight trace of blood was from a head injury that she had received knocking her unconscious. This blood trail ran to the middle of the street and stopped immediately in the eastbound lanes of traffic.
As the snow melted away, investigator Lloyd recovered a spent bullet casing and 2 small white buttons from a woman's blouse. One was found on the front seat of the Cadillac, the other at the end of the blood trail on the street.
Right in front of the police station, authorities say the suspect fired at least 4 more shots into the passenger's side.
As news of the abduction spread and TV camera crews descended on Thornton, investigator Lloyd passed the evidence he collected over to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Known as the CBI, the unit is responsible for collecting and receiving evidence from the state's law enforcement agencies.
The nature of the crime was quite severe. We were asked to conduct our analysis on a rush basis. We had significant evidence in the areas of firearms, in fingerprints, and in what we call the physical match area.
This was my first big case once I got hired by the CBI, and it was also a first case that I was assigned the duty of being a primary analyst.
As primary analyst, it would be Yvonne Wood's job to farm out the evidence to the right laboratory agents. Over the course of the next 7 days, there would be a large amount of evidence for Woods and the staff of the CBI to sort through. As the day was winding down, a vital piece of information came to light. Police had found a blue Geostorm parked near where Jackie had stopped to help the woman who had been raped. A check of the license plate gave police the name of the abducted woman. She was 25-year-old Rhonda Maloney.
I don't know why they took Rhonda. I don't know what they want to do with Rhonda, but she's my sister.
Now that the investigators knew who the victim was, they could start examining the blood evidence found on the police station's lawn.
The blood was subjected to genetic marker testing in my laboratory. It was established that many of these samples needed to be forwarded for DNA examination.
In 1994, the CBI did not yet have the ability to handle DNA casework. So Agent Woods sent Rhonda's blood sample to Cellmark Diagnostics. The company was one of only 2 laboratories in the country that could extract and compare strands of DNA material. Once they determined the genetic composition of Rhonda's blood, Cellmark could then match that sample to any other DNA evidence collected by the detectives. DNA was first used in a murder case in 1986. It helped convict the murderer of 2 young girls in England. By the break of day on Sunday, the police had still not found a trace of Rhonda Maloney or her kidnapper. On a hunch, a sheriff's deputy stopped by the site where Rhonda Maloney's car was found, and there, in the melting snow, was something the investigators had missed. It was a small black pager.
Finding the pager on the second day was a big plus for us in this investigation. We've all been taught to collect things that look out of place, and that pager was out of place.
And then came an even bigger surprise. When the police called one of the numbers on that pager, they got a recording. The person on the other line was a cop.
By mid-morning, the search for Rhonda Maloney is airborne.
Monday morning, February 14th, Valentine's Day, Rhonda Maloney the woman who was abducted on the lawn of the Thornton, Colorado Police Department, was still missing. A statewide search was underway, and time was working against the police finding her alive. But Rhonda's family was holding out hope.
I was worried the whole time, but I didn't want to believe it.
Carrie Gemeinhardt is Rhonda's sister.
I kept telling everybody that she was going to be okay.
The search for Rhonda's abductor, however, was proceeding rapidly. The pager that was found in the snow near Rhonda's car was about to break the case wide open. The Thornton PD obtained a search warrant for the pager and began to call the telephone numbers that appeared on the display. The most frequently called number was that of a Denver police detective named Robert Harlan.
Belt at that time was a career cop, a decorated cop. Worked hard at it. He was a cop that many people looked up to.
But why was his number on a pager found at the scene of a violent crime? The answer had to do with Robert Harlan's family.
Through the registration of the pager to the Harlan family, we were able to link that pager to Robert Harlan, another piece of the puzzle.
Robert Harlan is Robert Harlan's son, and he resembled the person Jackie Criazzo described to the police sketch artist. Colorado's Motor Vehicle Department confirmed that Robert drove a teal-colored Saturn, the same car Jackie spotted on the night of the abduction. They speculated that Robert may have stalked Rhonda on her way home from work. The closer investigators looked into Robert Harlan's police rap sheet, the more he became a prime suspect.
His prior convictions included violence with women. We presented evidence that he was involved with a number of women in a violent way, in a sexually demanding way. He had a third-degree assault conviction that started out as a sexual assault charge.
That night from her hospital room, Jackie Criazzo picked Robert out of a photo lineup.
Police pulled 29-year-old Robert Harlan out of bed. He was staying with his grandmother, who lives here. Police say Harlan was surprised and meek when arrested.
Inside Robert's grandmother's house, investigator Lloyd found a box of ammunition shells. These seemed to match the bullet casings found at the abduction scene. Firearms expert Alan Hammond knew right away what kind of gun the bullets were used in.
It is a 9mm semi-automatic pistol manufactured by Smith & Wesson. The cartridge has the capacity to completely penetrate the human body and exit the other side.
Similar bullets were being removed from Jackie's body, but investigators had no gun to test them against. This put Robert Harlan, Robert's father, in a difficult position.
He became aware that a weapon connected to his son was involved in the investigation. I can't imagine the conflict, the internal turmoil and conflict that Robert Harlan went through.
Meanwhile, the case against his son was proceeding rapidly. Agents found the Saturn that Jackie had identified, parked nearby.
In Robert Harlan's car, I found evidence that Rhonda had been placed in the back seat of the vehicle. There was blood on the left rear floor molding, and there was blood on the cushion of the vehicle.
Investigator Lloyd discovered that the trunk was wet, as if it had been hosed down. Inside the car, he found another interesting clue.
I observed a number of unused condom packages behind the driver's seat as well as in the driver's door. These were collected as evidence.
The condom packages were turned over to the CBI's Paige Doherty. She examined the packages and wondered if Robert Harlan used a condom when he raped Rhonda Maloney.
Oftentimes when crimes are committed, a suspect will attempt to prevent certain types of evidence from being left at the scene of the crime.
As he was processing the arrest scene, investigator Lloyd got an urgent call. Another crime scene had been discovered at a highway underpass off Interstate 70, north of Denver.
I arrived on scene, talked to the detectives. They informed me that a cleanup crew from their city had been out to clean up some tires in a very isolated and dark area. They found clothing and they found some blood on a blouse.
The blouse matched a description that Jackie Criazzo gave of what Rhonda Maloney had been wearing.
The scene on Smith Road in Aurora told me that this was the murder scene. I had 2 fired shell casings, 2 bullets, and 2 very large pools of blood.
Investigator Lloyd figured that Robert drove Rhonda here, dragged her out of his back seat, and forced her to walk under the overpass. He pulled out his gun and shot her twice. The bullets passed through her body. There was so much blood on the frozen ground that investigator Lloyd had to dig it out with a garden trowel. But Rhonda's body was still missing. To help find her, the police brought in a bloodhound named Yogi. One sniff of Rhonda's bloody blouse, and he was off and running. Bloodhounds, whose sense of smell is 3 million times that of humans, were first used to track people in 16th century England.
This dog tracked from Smith Road, where Rhonda Maloney's blouse was found, to the front porch of Robert Harlan's grandmother's house in Denver.
It was a distance of 7 miles, but he didn't stop there. A team of Boy Scouts followed his direction, and here, at this spot, they found a black purse that belonged to Rhonda. Like all the evidence, the purse was brought to the laboratory at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Unlike the bullets that needed a gun and the blood that needed a body, the evidence found on the purse might stand on its own. If they found a print, it would give investigators the first positive physical link between Harlan and Maloney. But fingerprint expert George Herrera was unsure if any prints had survived.
The fact that that evidence was out there in the open, in the cold, that can greatly hinder any chances of developing a usable fingerprint off of the evidence.
But there are ways of getting a print off of such a hard, non-porous surface. Agent Herrera employed a classic forensic technique in an ingenious way, and he used a common household product, superglue.
The superglue is heated to a temperature where the superglue begins to boil, actually gives off vapors. The vapors surround the suspended evidence within the chamber. The vapors attach themselves to the entire surface of the evidence, but they particularly attach themselves to any fingerprint residue. We put it under what we call an alternate light source, and oftentimes these various frequencies from this light source will cause that latent print to fluoresce.
The technique was a success. Agent Herrera found a latent print on the cellophane window of the wallet. He checked against the set of prints the police had taken from Robert Harlan. It was a perfect match.
This was her personal wallet, and the fact that his print was found on the face of that wallet, that directly put him in control of her property.
The case against Robert Harlan was starting to fall into place. Investigators had his pager. They recovered blood, bullets, and condom wrappers. But in order to pin a capital murder charge on him, the police were hoping to find either a gun or Rhonda Maloney's body. Wednesday, February 15th. It had been 5 days since Rhonda Maloney was abducted and murdered. Her suspect was already in custody, but there was still an all-out search for her body.
The only problem was that we did not have enough to go to trial on Robert Harlan. It's nice to have that body. It's possible to prosecute without the body, but we need to work on where that body was located.
Rhonda's father came to Colorado and he joined the police search, looking for any sign of his daughter. The tragedy was beginning to sink in.
This is probably the hardest thing anybody could ever go through. The not knowing, and Rhonda's never gonna come back. I don't get to see her anymore. It destroyed my family.
Robert, listen to what I'm saying. My sole purpose is in finding her, okay?
24 hours after his arrest, Robert Harlan was being interrogated by the Thornton police. Despite several hours of questioning, Harlan was unwilling to talk.
And if I find her, I'm happy. That's it.
I don't know where she is. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what she's doing.
His refusal to cooperate forced investigators to work harder. They got some help from the Denver Police Department, specifically from Detective Belt Harlan, Robert's father.
He did what he was trained to do, and he did what his entire life was devoted to, and that was upholding the law. So he provided that gun.
That gun was the weapon police were desperate to find. Belt Harlan also handed over his son's bloody clothes. Both were turned in to the CBI for testing.
I was asked to test fire the firearm and to compare the test bullets and the test cartridges that I fired to the evidence bullets and evidence cartridges to see if they had the same microscopic individual characteristics. I was able to determine that the bullets from the vehicle, the bullets from the victim were all fired by the same firearm, that the cartridge cases found at the crime scene also were positively identified as being fired by the suspect's weapon.
Bullet comparisons were first used by Scotland Yard to catch a murderer in 1835. The police now had fingerprint and ballistic evidence tying Robert Harlan directly to the shootings. Detectives questioning Robert began to use this evidence against him.
We found her shirt minus 3 buttons. One that was down with you, 2 that were up here where I told you they were, and we got her shoes, and our bloodhounds are on the track.
The truth is, the bloodhounds and the police had still failed to locate the body. However, as Saturday morning dawned, 7 days after her abduction, a local amateur detective followed a hunch and walked down a long and lonely stretch of Imboden Road, just south of Denver's new airport. Rhonda Maloney's body had been discarded under this bridge.
Even though she had been there for several days, there was very little decomposition. It almost looked as if she had been placed there within a matter of hours to us finding her.
There was a reason why Rhonda's body appeared to be so clean. It became apparent when detectives found a bloody orange towel at a car wash, just miles from where the murder had taken place.
Robert Harlan had placed Rhonda in the trunk of his car. At the car wash, with the body still in the trunk, Robert Harlan hosed down the body.
Robert had used the towel to mop the blood off of Rhonda's body. His other attempt to hide evidence was also being exposed. Investigator Lloyd spied an empty condom wrapper near the corner of the bridge and another in a nearby field. If he could prove that these empty wrappers were torn from the same package, the one that Lloyd recovered from the back seat of Robert's car, then it would help further implicate him in Rhonda's murder. At the CBI, Paige Doherty was ready to perform what's known as a physical match.
These tears are actually like putting a puzzle back together, where each of the pieces are individual in and of itself.
Agent Doherty worked meticulously, examining the condom wrappers piece by piece, comparing the patterns.
I knew that I had gotten a match after I had examined all of the characteristics of the perforations and the edges, and all of the features were in agreement.
One more piece of the puzzle was in place against Robert Harlan. Next came the results of the autopsy, conducted by Dr. Pat Allen. It revealed the brutality of Robert's attack on Rhonda.
We found the main cause of death was a gunshot wound to her left forehead. and that bullet exited the back of her head. Additionally, she had sustained multiple blunt traumatic injuries to her face, head, and the rest of her body.
Dr. Allen recovered blood samples from Rhonda. He also discovered traces of semen in her vaginal tract, despite Robert Harlan's use of condoms. Agent Woods sent the samples and semen to Cellmark for DNA matching. Investigators also obtained hair and saliva from Robert and sent it to the lab. After weeks of waiting, Agent Woods received the results. The blood found on Robert Harlan's clothes was positively identified as Rhonda Maloney's. As for the sperm sample, the DNA test revealed that the odds it came from anyone other than Robert Harlan were 7.4 million to 1. From ballistics to fingerprinting, physical match to DNA testing, the CBI had the evidence against Robert Harlan.
Robert Harlan was charged with first-degree murder in Colorado. That's intentional and deliberate taking of another human life. He was charged with various other crimes, including kidnapping, assault on Rhonda Maloney, assault on Jackie Criazzo.
The trial began in 1996, and Jackie Criazzo, now paralyzed from the waist down, was the state's key witness.
She asked me what time it was, and I have a digital clock on the dash of my car. And I pointed it out to her, and it was 5:58.
Jackie's detailed testimony set the stage for the arrival of more than 300 pieces of physical evidence. And while the prosecution's case against him was overwhelming, Robert Harlan remained silent.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Elliott Harlan, guilty, first-degree murder after deliberation.
Robert Harlan was found guilty on all counts. Given the heinous nature of the crime, the state of Colorado sought the death penalty against him.
Robert Harlan had Rhonda Maloney's life in his hands, and he took it. Mercilessly, torturously, brutally, he took it.
Belt Harlan pleaded for his son's life. The jury was not persuaded.
I am very happy that he got the death sentence. I feel that life imprisonment was not punishment enough for what he did.
I felt that justice had been done, and I still do.
Any comments? No comment.
I was very, very grateful to all of the people that put this case together.
For Bob Lloyd and the forensic scientists at the CBI, it was a gratifying ending to a horrifying crime.
Rhonda Maloney should not have died like this. No one should have to die under these circumstances, but it was our duty to investigate the crime and come up with a good conclusion to this.
It was a great case because there was this tremendous amount of evidence, and it was all of the results put together that let us come to a positive outcome.
Coming up, a single shard of glass helps catch a killer. On July 27, 1992, the Greeley, Colorado police were called to the home of 78-year-old Frida Winter. When Detective Clay Buckingham arrived, it was obvious that someone had broken into the basement window. The rest of the house seemed undisturbed, except for some muddy footprints near the back door. He then entered Frida's bedroom.
She was laying on the floor in her bedroom, and her bed was unmade. There was a large pool of blood on the sheets in the bed. She was laying right next to the bed on the floor. Her dress was pulled up over her face.
Greeley is a small town. Over the course of a bad year, there might be 5 or 6 murders, most of them crimes of passion. But this case, a lethal bludgeoning of an elderly church-going lady, was especially difficult to comprehend.
There was blood spatter on the walls and the ceiling in the bedroom. She had some major wounds to her head, and particularly one right to her forehead. She also had a wound to her neck where her neck had been cut, and she had wounds on her arms and on her fingers where it appeared that she was trying to fight them off.
This was Detective Buckingham's first murder case. He had worked his way up from the narcotics unit to the rank of detective. The footprints near the back door convinced him that more than one person had committed the crime. He thought it may have been gang-related or a burglary gone bad.
We thought they were juveniles because of the amount of injuries on Frida Winter. That is a pretty classic sign of juveniles committing a crime like this when they basically do what they call overkill. A juvenile will keep stabbing or assaulting a person until that person really doesn't move anymore because they don't understand what death is all about. Another sign that we thought it was juveniles was that her head was covered and her face was covered. They don't want to see the gruesome part of somebody's face after they've assaulted them like this.
With a high-profile case like this, Detective Buckingham wanted to make sure the evidence was collected properly. He called Colorado Bureau of Investigation Agent Don Solers. Agent Solers has more than 20 years as both a crime scene investigator and fingerprint expert. One of the first things he looked at was the basement window. It wasn't a big window. Agent Solers figured it would have been difficult for an average-sized adult to squeeze through the opening. One panel of glass had been shattered, and the other had fresh prints visible from the outside. He decided to remove the whole window and have it brought back to his lab. And that wasn't the only evidence.
Crime scene, room where the body was, there was blood collected. I believe there was hair collected. The interior of the house was processed for fingerprints. I believe there was only one latent print that was recovered off of the refrigerator inside the house. The house was very clean.
The owner of that print turned up that evening. It was Harry Winter, Frida's son. After questioning him at length, the police released him as a suspect. Harry told them everything he could about his mother.
She was a very kind person, very compassionate, and this all went in line with her religion. She would give you the shirt off of her back. She would do anything for anyone that really needed help.
Back at the CBI lab, investigators began to examine the basement window.
I processed the windows with black powder, and once I enhanced the print with the black powder, I lifted them with fingerprint tape and placed them on a white background, marking the location on the window and making a similar mark on the latent print lift so that I could place the print back exactly where it came from on the surface.
There were a total of 43 lifted from the 4 panes of glass in the aluminum frame. Agent Solers entered those prints into the state's fingerprint database, called AFIS, for Automated Fingerprint Identification System.
This system is an automated process that will compare the latent print to every ink fingerprint that has been entered into the system, both criminal and civil.
Modern-day computers can search a file of 500,000 fingerprints in 0.8 of a second. But of the millions of fingerprints in Colorado's AFIS system, not one matched back to Frida Winter's killer. That meant that whoever left those prints on the window had never been arrested. Back in Greeley, Detective Buckingham was employing some decidedly low-tech methods to find that suspect.
I was searching the alley for any type of evidence which might have been dropped, and there was a large cement culvert just west of her house, which had a wooden lid on it. I removed that lid and looked down into this culvert, and in the culvert I found a baseball bat, a hammer, some broken pieces of glass. When I saw these items, I saw that they had blood all over them, so I knew immediately these were probably weapons used in this crime, and the glass had probably come from the broken window.
It was the first big break in the case. However, the murder weapons, the bat and hammer, had no fingerprints on them. Yet one small piece of evidence did have a visible print. It was a single shard of glass, and that shard would be big enough to catch a killer. The Greeley police had found a shard of glass in a culvert not far from the house where Frida Winter was murdered. Colorado Bureau of Investigation fingerprint experts were focusing their attention on the prints found on the glass.
There were prints on both sides as if somebody was grasping that shard to try to remove it. Historically, the reason that suspects will remove these types of items from a crime scene is to alter the scene and also to hide or destroy potential evidence that possibly would incriminate them in the crime.
Based on the location of the culvert, police figured the murderers were most likely local. Also, they had learned that on the very night Frida was murdered, people were talking about the killing before her body had even been discovered. Local informants implicated a number of suspects, but one by one, they were cleared.
We certainly would get depressed at times when we would think that we would get a good set of suspects, and eventually they would pan out that they were not their fingerprints, and then we would start all over again.
For 4 years, Frida Winter's murder went unsolved. Then, in January 1996, a seemingly unrelated event gave police their first solid lead. In Denver, a 17-year-old was being transferred from an overcrowded juvenile detention center to another youth facility. His fingerprints were rolled and entered into the state's fingerprint identification system. Previously, juvenile prints were excluded from that system. But that year, an increase in juvenile crime persuaded lawmakers to change that system and begin adding juvenile prints. As he does regularly, CBI agent Don Sollers logged onto the system to check his unsolved cases. All of the prints he had entered were eliminated that day, except for one, the one from the shard of glass found near Frida Winter's home.
And when his print came up on the screen, his name is not there, just his print. And then so I have to pull the fingerprint card to see who that person actually is. And then that's when I found out that the name was Samuel Mendez.
Most people in Greeley knew him as Sammy Mendez. At the time of Frida Winter's killing, he was 14 and lived just down the block.
He was a fairly good kid. He had not been in a lot of trouble, very little trouble in Greeley, in fact. He had been in a little bit of trouble down in the Denver area.
But this was serious trouble. The Greeley police wanted to know how Sammy's prints ended up on the basement window. Sammy did admit to police that he had been inside Frida's house the year before the murder. Frida had hired Sammy and his grandfather to paint the house. She had even made them lunch.
So out of the kindness of her heart, she brought this young man and his grandfather into the house to fix a meal for them and provide food for them because they were working on her house. When Sammy got into the house, he was able to note the layout of the house.
Sammy told police that if his prints were on that window, they were left there from when he painted the house. But CBI agent Sollers doubted his explanation.
The prints on the glass, especially the broken shards, on the outside, the finger marks had removed the dirt. And so that showed that those prints could not have been there a year or more. Also, on the shards of glass, prints were on both sides showing that the person had taken a hold of that shard to try to remove it. Those prints could not have been in that position when the window was intact. They could only have been placed there when the window was broken.
To prove that the shard of glass with Sammy's print came from the window, CBI agent Jackie Battles literally put the window back together, piece by piece.
My job was to first sort through all the glass by labeling each of the items separately, so that when I would attempt to put any of these pieces back into the window like a puzzle, that I would know from where the glass originated from.
Using a polarizing microscope, making sure the glass matched in 3 dimensions, Agent Battles painstakingly put 40 fragments, including the shard with Sammy's print, back into the window frame. It was a perfect fit.
In this case, it was important for me to place the glass back into the window because it put Samuel Mendez inside the residence where he had no reason to be at the time of the incident.
Police were now certain they had enough evidence to bring Sammy Mendez to trial.
In the arrest for murder. Frida Winters.
In court, they presented their theory of how the murder took place.
The last anybody had talked to Frida Winter had been Saturday evening, about 9:30 in the evening. And she had been somewhat sick the previous week. She was telling him during that conversation that she was feeling better and that she would probably be at church the next morning.
Frida Winter never made it to church. She went to bed for the last time sometime before midnight. While she was sleeping, Sammy Mendez crept up to the basement window. After smashing the window and dropping inside, Sammy climbed the stairs and unlocked the back door. His accomplices rushed inside, leaving footprints on the carpet.
So that showed that there was more than one person. At a minimum, there was one or two others in addition to Samuel Mendez.
Frida most likely heard them and called out. One of the assailants grabbed a hammer from the basement. Another found a baseball bat that Frida kept by the door, ironically, for her own protection. Investigators testified that after the killing, Sammy and the others panicked and ran out of the house. And they set out to prove that Sammy tried to cover up his crime. They said that he returned to the window, retrieved the shards of glass, and ran to the culvert to hide them. It was this testimony that Sammy's fingerprint was on one of those shards that helped seal his fate.
Fingerprints are exclusive to one person only. So because they were his fingerprints on both the inside and the outside of that window, that was enough to convict him of this crime.
In November 1996, Sammy Mendez was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He never confessed or implicated any of the other suspects.
We don't know if there were people that he possibly knew. We're always hopeful that we will find out who that other person or other persons are.
In this state, we have what is called a felony murder rule that says that if you are involved in the commission of a particular felony, in this case a burglary, and the death of a third person occurs, then you're just as equally guilty of that murder as the person who actually committed the murder.
And forensic evidence examined by CBI agent Yvonne Woods strongly suggests that Sammy did not act alone.
I examined some hairs that came from the bedding of Frida Winters, and I compared them to known samples from Sam Mendez. The results of my analysis indicated that these hairs did not come from Sam Mendez.
Those hairs have never been identified. They remain in an evidence file, along with scrapings from Frida Winters' fingernails.
The evidence that was collected back in 1992 would still be viable for DNA examination in the hopes of finding any other perpetrators that may have been involved in this crime.